The shuttle fell through the red sky like a dying star. Inside, gripped her seat and watched the clouds burn past the small window. The planet below was black and red, covered in sharp mountains and valleys that looked like wounds in the earth. This was KX-7749, the planet the Galactic Council called a death world. This was her prison. 3 weeks ago had been a terraforming engineer on station Orion 12. She had spent 15 years studying how to make dead planets alive. She knew more about soil and seeds than anyone on the station. But the Council did not care about her knowledge. They only cared that she had broken their law. She had stolen seeds, high-yield seeds that could grow in bad soil, seeds that the Council kept locked away for their own use. Had wanted to send them to a struggling colony on the edge of human space, a place where children were starving because the Council would not share its resources. She had been caught at the transport dock with 200 seeds hidden in her clothes. The Council gave her a choice: death by execution or death by exile to KX-7749. Everyone knew there was no real difference. No human had ever survived more than a week on the planet. The atmosphere was poison. The rain was acid. The creatures that lived there were monsters that could tear through metal. The Council had marked the planet with black warning beacons and told all ships to stay away. Chose exile. At least on the planet she would have a chance. A small chance, but still a chance. The shuttle hit the ground hard. His head slammed against her seat, and for a moment everything went dark. When she opened her eyes, red emergency lights were flashing. The shuttle's computer was making a screaming sound. She unbuckled herself and fell to the floor. "Damage report," she said. The computer's voice was broken and full of static. "Hull breach in cargo section. Life support at 40%. Engines destroyed. This vessel will not fly again." Had expected this. The Council did not give exiles good shuttles. They gave them broken ships that would crash. She pulled herself up and looked through the cracked window. Outside, the sky was the color of blood. Black glass covered the ground in every direction, and in the distance she could see mountains with smoke coming from their peaks. She had 3 days of air in her suit, maybe 4 if she breathed slowly. The Council expected her to die in those 3 days. They expected her to sit in the broken shuttle and wait for the end. Did not plan to sit and wait. She found in the cargo section, buried under broken boxes, was a maintenance drone, a simple machine about the size of a dog. He had 2 arms for fixing things and a small computer brain that could do basic calculations. The Council had let her keep him because they thought he was useless. "Wake up," said, pushing the boxes away. The drone's eyes flickered on. "Good morning. I detect that we have crashed. I also detect that the atmosphere outside will kill you in approximately 4 minutes without protection. My calculation shows your survival odds at 0.003%. "Stop calculating," said, "start helping." She spent the first hour going through everything in the shuttle. She found her smuggled seeds, still safe in their sealed container. She found tools, water packets, emergency food bars, and pieces of metal she could use for building. She found a broken air filter that could maybe fix. Most importantly, she found the soil sampling kit from her old job. The Council had not bothered to remove it. When she was ready, she put on her suit and stepped outside. The air hit her helmet like a fist. Even through the protective glass, she could feel the heat. The ground under her feet was sharp black glass that crunched with every step. In the distance, something roared, something big. Walked to the nearest patch of dark soil and knelt down. She took out her sampling kit and began to work. The soil was black and thick, full of metals that would poison most plants. But as she looked closer, she saw something moving. Tiny organisms, smaller than grains of sand, crawling through the dirt. "Come look at this," she said. The drone rolled over on his small wheels. "I see microorganisms. They should not exist. This soil is toxic." "They exist," said. "That means something can live here. That means I can live here." The rain started falling. It hissed when it hit the ground and quickly moved back toward the shuttle. But she stopped and watched the rain more carefully. Where it fell on the black glass, nothing happened. But where it fell on the soil, the tiny organisms seemed to move faster. They were eating something in the rain. "That is not acid," said slowly. "It is food. The rain is feeding them." She spent the rest of the day exploring the area around the shuttle. She found a cave system in a nearby hill, large enough to live in and protected from the wind. She found a stream of dark water that her equipment said was dangerous but not deadly. And she found tracks in the glass, huge tracks with 6 deep marks, like something massive had walked past recently. On the second day, she saw the creature. It came over the ridge at sunset, moving slowly on 6 thick legs. It was the size of a small building, covered in hard black plates like armor. Its head was long and flat, with a mouth full of teeth that could bite through steel. Stood very still, her heart beating so hard she could hear it in her helmet. The creature looked at her. Its eyes were small and yellow, and they studied her with something that looked almost like curiosity. Then it turned and walked away, disappearing over the ridge without attacking. Let out her breath. That was a maw crawler, said. According to council records, they are extremely dangerous and will kill any living thing they see. Then why am I not dead? Asked. She thought about this for a long time. She thought about the microorganisms in the soil that should not exist. She thought about the rain that fed instead of killed. She thought about the monster that had looked at her and walked away. The council had called this planet hostile. They had called it a death world, but was beginning to understand something important. The planet was not hostile. The planet was simply different. It had rules that no one had bothered to learn, patterns that no one had tried to understand. Was going to learn them. She was going to understand them, and she was going to survive. She walked back to the cave and began to unpack her seeds. There was work to do. 6 months had passed since crashed on the planet. The council's satellites still watched from above, recording data and sending reports to distant offices. The reports all said the same thing: no life signs detected, exile presumed dead. The council was wrong. Stood at the entrance of her cave and looked down at the valley below. Where there had once been only black glass and dead soil, there were now rows of growing plants. They were not tall or beautiful, just small green shoots pushing up through the dark earth. But they were alive. They were the first crops ever grown on a planet that everyone said could not support life. The work had been hard, harder than anything had ever done. In the first week, she had planted her seeds directly in the soil, and they had all died. The metals in the ground were too strong, but she had not given up. She had studied the microorganisms that lived in the dirt, the tiny creatures that could survive where nothing else could. She had learned how they ate the metals and turned them into something else. For 3 months, she had experimented. She had mixed the microorganisms with her seeds. She had failed again and again. But slowly, she had created something new. A hybrid plant that could grow in the poisoned soil. A grain with dark seeds that tasted like wheat but was stronger, harder, able to survive in conditions that would kill any normal crop. She called it. The rain helped more than she had expected. It was not acid at all, but a complex mixture that broke down dead things and turned them into food for the soil. Had built collection systems from pieces of her crashed shuttle, channels and containers that caught the rain and directed it to her fields. The plants drank the strange water and grew stronger. But the crops were not her greatest achievement. That honor belonged to the creature that stood beside her now, watching the valley with small yellow eyes. His name was... The maw crawler had returned many times after that first meeting. At first had been afraid. She had hidden in her cave and watched through a crack in the rocks as the massive creature walked past. But she had noticed something strange. Never came close to her fields. He walked around them, always keeping his distance, as if he was watching over them rather than hunting. One day had left some of her food scraps near the edge of her camp. Old emergency bars that she could not eat anymore, pieces of dried fruit that had gone bad. The next morning the food was gone, and there were fresh maw crawler tracks in the dirt. She had kept leaving food, had kept coming back, and slowly over many weeks the distance between them had grown smaller. Now, after 6 months, he would walk beside her through the fields. He would let her touch his armored head. He would make a low rumbling sound when she spoke to him, a sound that had learned meant he was happy. "You are not a monster," she said to him, scratching the ridge above his eye. "You are a guard, you protect this place." Rumbled in agreement. She had learned much about the maw crawlers by watching. They were not hunters that killed everything they saw. They were territorial creatures that protected their land from the truly dangerous things that lived deeper in the planet. Things with too many legs and mouths full of poison. Things that came up from the underground caves at night looking for food. The maw crawlers kept these things away. When it started patrolling fields, those dangerous things had stopped coming near her cave. She slept better now. The communication device crackled to life inside the cave. Walked back inside, with following as far as his massive body could fit through the entrance. She picked up the device and heard a familiar voice. "This is, are you there?" Her brother, He was a communications officer on a research station 3 systems away. He had risked everything to contact her, using hidden frequencies that the Council could not easily track. "I am here," she said. "I am alive." There was a long pause. When spoke again, his voice was shaking. "The Council said you were dead. They said no one could survive that planet. How are you alive?" Looked back at the fields beyond him, at everything she had built from nothing. "I learned the rules," she said. "The planet is not trying to kill me. It is just different, and different does not mean impossible." She told him everything. The microorganisms in the soil, the rain that fed instead of burned, the maw crawlers that protected instead of attacked. The growing in rows down the valley, listened without speaking, and when she was finished, he was quiet for a long time. "I am sending you supplies," he finally said. "Medical equipment, better tools, more seeds. I will hide them in cargo shipments to a nearby system. You will have to find a way to retrieve them." "You will lose your job if they catch you," said. "You are my sister. You are supposed to be dead, but you are not. You are growing food on a death world and making friends with monsters. I think losing my job is a small price." The supplies arrived 2 months later, hidden in a probe that crashed near her camp. Found medicine, tools, seeds for vegetables and fruits, and a small device for recording messages. There was also a note from, "Tell the Council their inhospitable planet sends its regards." She used the recording device to document everything. Every experiment she had tried, every failure and success, every observation about the planet and its creatures. She created a manual, a guide for surviving on a world that everyone said could not support life. If something happened to her, she wanted her knowledge to survive. One morning came to her cave with something in his mouth. At first thought it was prey, some dead animal he had caught. But then she heard a small sound, a weak cry like a baby making noise. It was a juvenile maw crawler, no bigger than a large dog. One of its legs was badly injured, bent at a wrong angle. It was dying. Set the young creature down at its feet and looked at her with his yellow eyes. He made a sound she had never heard before, a soft whine that sounded almost like a question. Understood was asking for help. She worked through the night. She cleaned the wound and set the broken leg using pieces of metal from her shuttle. She fed the young creature water mixed with nutrients from her crops. She stayed beside it, keeping it warm, talking to it softly even though she knew it could not understand her words. By morning the young maw crawler was alive, weak but alive. Named her, which meant flower in the old language of her ancestors. It seemed right for this place where she was making impossible things grow. Stayed close for many days, watching over as she healed. When the young creature finally stood on her own legs again, she did not leave. She stayed in the camp, following around like a pet, sleeping near the entrance of the cave, learning to recognize the sound of voice. On the day harvested her first full crop of, she stood in her field with on one side and on the other. The grain was dark and heavy, enough to feed her for months, enough to prove that everything the Council believed was wrong. She looked up at the sky at the satellites watching from above. She knew they could not see her. She knew they thought she was dead. But she was alive. She was growing food. She was raising monsters as friends. And this was only the beginning. The story spread through the dark channels of space like fire through dry grass. In hidden stations and refugee ships, in the crowded slums of failing colonies, people whispered about a woman on a death world who was growing food. They said she had tamed monsters. They said she had done what the Galactic Council said was impossible. Most people thought it was just a story, a dream that desperate people told themselves to feel better, but some people believed, and some of those believers came looking for her. Was the first. His shuttle fell from the sky on a cold morning, trailing smoke and fire. Watched it crash in the northern valley, about 3 kilometers from her camp. She told to stay and guard the greenhouse, and then she ran toward the crash with following close behind. She found half dead in the wreckage. He was a thin man with gray hair and tired eyes, wearing the worn clothes of someone who had been running for a long time. His body was covered in burns from the crash, and his breathing was weak and shallow. Pulled him from the shuttle and carried him back to her camp. She cleaned his wounds and gave him medicine from the supplies had sent. She fed him soup made from. For 3 days, he slept without waking and began to think he would die. On the 4th day, he opened his eyes and saw standing over him. The scream he made was loud enough to scare birds from trees a kilometer away. He tried to run, but his legs were too weak, and he fell on the ground. Looked at him with confusion, like she did not understand why he was making so much noise. "She will not hurt you," said, helping him sit up. "Her name is, she thinks she is a pet." Stared at the maw crawler, then back at. "I came looking for a miracle," he said slowly. "I did not expect the miracle to have 6 legs and teeth." His name was, and he had been a before the council destroyed his career. He had spent 30 years studying alien worlds, and he had come to believe something that the council did not want to hear. Humans were approaching new planets the wrong way. Instead of learning how planets worked, humans tried to force planets to work like Earth. Instead of adapting to new environments, humans tried to make environments adapt to them. He had written papers about this. He had given speeches, and the council had called him dangerous and taken away his job, his home, and his future. When he heard the stories about, he had stolen a shuttle and come looking for her. He had wanted to see if the stories were true. Now he knew they were. "You did exactly what I always said we should do," he told, sitting in her greenhouse and looking at the rows of growing plants. "You learned the rules of this world. You worked with the planet instead of against it. This is what humanity should have been doing all along." "The council will never believe that," said. "The council does not matter," replied. "What matters is that we prove it can be done. What matters is that we show people another way." More visitors came after. They arrived in broken ships and stolen shuttles, crossing the council's quarantine lines to find the death world where a woman was growing food. Came next an engineer whose family had died when a colony world collapsed. The council had called it a natural disaster, but knew the truth. The council had ignored warnings about the planet's weather systems. They had built the colony in a dangerous place to save money. When the storms came, 10,000 people had died, including his husband and 2 children. She had nothing left to lose. She had heard about and decided that if she was going to die anyway, she wanted to die doing something that mattered. Did not die, she lived and she built things. She designed better water collection systems. She created tools for farming the metallic soil. She turned pieces of crashed shuttles into machines that could do the work of 10 people. Within 6 months, the small camp had become a real settlement. Arrived on a cold night, a young man with empty eyes and scars on his arms. He had been a child soldier in the border wars, trained to fight and kill before he was old enough to understand what he was doing. When the war ended, the government had thrown him away like a broken tool. He had lived on the streets for years, fighting to survive, until he heard about a place where unwanted people could start again. He did not talk much at first. He watched the others work and kept his distance. But slowly he began to help. He was strong and fast, and he learned quickly. When raiders from a dying colony came to steal crops, was the one who organized the defense. He stood with the maw crawlers and fought until the raiders ran away. After that he talked more, he smiled sometimes. He began to heal. The oldest visitor was a botanist with white hair and hands that shook from illness. The doctors had told her she had less than a year to live. Her body was failing and there was no cure. She had spent her whole life studying plants, and she had one wish before she died, to see something impossible grow. Showed her the fields. She showed her the greenhouse full of vegetables that should not exist. She showed her the hybrid flowers that bloomed in the acidic soil, purple and red and gold. Cried when she saw them. She said they were the most beautiful things she had ever seen. She did not die that year, or the year after. Something about the planet, maybe the microorganisms or the strange rain or something no one could explain, seemed to slow her illness. She was still sick, but she was not dying anymore. She tended the greenhouse every day, caring for the plants like they were her children. The settlement grew. They called it New Dawn, a name that suggested one night around a fire. It felt right. They were all people who had lost everything, and they were all starting again. They built houses from the black glass and metal of the valley. They dug wells and created irrigation systems. They learned to communicate with the maw crawlers using sounds and smells that discovered through careful study. The creatures became partners, not pets. They guarded the fields and warned of danger. The council noticed eventually. Their satellites showed heat signatures and structures that should not exist. They sent an investigation team to find out what was happening. The team never came back. Their shuttle was destroyed by one of the planet's storms, torn apart by winds that could rip through metal. Found the wreckage and buried the dead with respect. She did not celebrate their deaths. They were just people following orders, people who had not understood what they were flying into. but she knew what their deaths meant. The Council would not ignore New Dawn forever. Sooner or later, they would come in greater numbers. Sooner or later, there would be a reckoning. "Let them come," said Wen shared her worries. "Let them see what we have built. Let them try to understand." Looked out at the settlement, at the 50 people who now called this place home. She looked at the fields of and the greenhouses full of vegetables. She looked at the maw crawlers patrolling the borders, massive shapes moving through the red twilight. They had built something here, something that the Council said was impossible, something that proved humanity could adapt to any world if they were willing to learn. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Ambassador stood before the great assembly of the Galactic Council, his hands shaking slightly as he held the data tablet. Behind him, a massive screen showed images that made the assembled leaders uncomfortable. Fields of crops on a planet marked with black warning beacons. Buildings where there should be only death. People walking among monsters that should have killed them on sight. 5 years ago, said, his voice echoing through the silent chamber, we exiled a woman named to planet KX7749. We sent her there to die. She did not die. The screen changed to show the settlement of New Dawn from above. The Council's satellites had finally been adjusted to see what was really happening on the surface. What they saw was impossible. The population is now over 200 humans, continued. They are growing food. They are building structures. They have somehow formed a relationship with the native creatures we classified as extremely dangerous. Everything we believed about this planet was wrong. The chamber erupted in angry voices. Council members shouted at each other, demanding explanations, blaming different departments for the failure, waited for the noise to die down. We have a choice, he said. We can ignore this and hope it goes away. We can destroy the settlement and everyone in it. Or we can send a military expedition to relocate the inhabitants and study what they have learned. The vote took 3 hours. In the end, the Council chose the third option. They would not kill the settlers. That would create martyrs and draw attention to their failures. Instead, they would take the settlers away, study their methods, and claim the discoveries for the Council. 12 warships gathered at the edge of the KX7749 system. 3,000 soldiers prepared for a simple mission: land on the planet, secure the settlement, and relocate all inhabitants to Council facilities. The operation was expected to take less than a week. Knew they were coming before they arrived, had sent a warning through his hidden channels. The Council was coming with ships and soldiers. They wanted to take everything New Dawn had built. She called a meeting in the center of the settlement. All 212 people came, standing in the red twilight, their faces showing fear and anger and determination. Around them, the maw crawlers gathered, dozens of massive shapes forming a protective circle. They are coming to take us away, said, her voice clear and strong. They want our knowledge. They want to study us like animals and then throw us away again. I will not tell you what to do. Each of you must make your own choice. If you want to go with them, I will not stop you, but I am staying. No one chose to leave. For 3 days, they prepared. Worked without sleep, adjusting the machines she had built, creating new tools they would need. Organized the defenders, humans, and maw crawlers working together. Studied the planet's weather patterns, looking for advantages they could use. Tended the greenhouse and prayed to gods she was not sure she believed in. The fleet arrived on the 4th day. The warships hung in orbit like metal clouds, blocking out the stars. A voice came through every communication channel in the settlement. This is Commander of the Galactic Council forces. You are ordered to surrender immediately. Gather in the central area of your settlement and wait for transport. Anyone who resists will be detained by force. You have 1 hour. Picked up the communication device and broadcast her response on every frequency the Council was using. This is of New Dawn. You called this planet inhospitable. You left me here to die. I did not die. I adapted. I learned. I built. And now you want to take what we have made because you finally see its value. She paused, looking at the faces of the people around her. Come down and try. The Council's shuttles descended through the red sky like a swarm of insects. 30 landing craft, each carrying 100 soldiers in full combat armor. They expected a quick surrender. They expected desperate refugees who would give up without a fight. They did not expect the planet to fight back. The storms came first. Had spent 5 years studying the weather of KX7749. She had learned that the storms were not random. They were connected to the planet's strange electromagnetic fields, fields that could be influenced by the microorganisms in the soil. Organisms that had been cultivating around her settlement for years. The landing craft were hit by winds that their pilots had not predicted. Lightning struck from clear skies. 3 shuttles crashed in the mountains. The others managed to land, but they were scattered across a wide area, far from each other, far from the settlement. Then the maw crawlers came. The Council's files said there were a few dozen of the creatures in this region. The satellites had counted 40 or 50 at most, but the maw crawlers did not live on the surface. They lived underground, in caves that went deep into the planet's crust. When they emerged, there were thousands of them. They came up from the ground like a tide. Massive shapes covered in black armor, moving with speed that should have been impossible for creatures their size. They surrounded the Council's soldiers, not attacking, just watching, waiting. Commander stood in front of her troops, her weapon raised, her heart beating too fast. She had fought in 3 wars. She had commanded soldiers in the worst conditions imaginable, but she had never seen anything like this. "Hold your fire," she ordered. "Nobody shoot unless I give the command." The maw crawlers parted and walked through them like she was walking through a forest. Walked beside her, the massive creature making the ground shake with each step. Behind them came 100 settlers, all unarmed, all unafraid. "Your equipment is corroding," said, pointing at the soldiers' weapons. "The microorganisms in the air are eating the metal. Your communications are jammed by the electromagnetic interference from the soil. Your vehicles will not work because the atmosphere is breaking down the fuel systems. You are 3,000 soldiers on a planet that does not want you here." Commander looked at her weapon. The metal was turning a strange color, becoming soft and weak. She looked at her soldiers and saw the same thing happening to their armor, their vehicles, their equipment. "You cannot stop us forever," said. "The Council will send more. They will send bigger ships, better weapons." "Maybe," said. "Or maybe they will learn what I learned. This planet is not your enemy. It is not a resource to be taken. It is a living thing with its own rules, its own patterns, its own ways. If you fight it, it will destroy you. If you learn from it, it will teach you things you never imagined." She held out her hand. "You can go back to your ships. Tell the Council what you saw. Tell them that New Dawn is not a threat. We are an example. We are proof that humanity can survive anywhere if we are willing to change how we think." The soldiers did not fire a single shot. They returned to their damaged shuttles and flew back to the fleet in orbit. Within 72 hours, the warships were gone. Commander did not go with them. She landed her shuttle in New Dawn 3 days later, alone, wearing simple clothes instead of her armor. "I want to learn," she said too. "I want to understand what you have done here." Smiled and welcomed her. Another unwanted person, finding a new home on a world that everyone said could not support life. The Council declared KX-7749 quarantined. They built warning beacons around the entire system and told all ships to stay away. They said the planet was too dangerous for contact. But Ambassador, watching from his office on the Council station, knew the truth. The planet was not dangerous. The planet was something much more frightening to the Council. The planet was proof that they were wrong. And in the red twilight of New Dawn, surrounded by her friends and her monsters, began planning for the future. 20 years had passed since crashed on the planet. 20 years since she had planted her first seeds in poisoned soil. 20 years since she had looked at a monster and seen a friend instead of an enemy. She stood on the ridge above the valley, her hair now gray at the edges, her face lined with years of work and worry and joy. Below her, the world had changed in ways she could never have imagined. The city of New Dawn spread across the basin like a living thing. Buildings rose from the black glass, not built in the human style but grown, using the same techniques had learned from the planet itself. The walls were made from cultivated minerals, strong as steel but shaped by microorganisms instead of machines. The roofs collected the enzyme rain and channeled it into the irrigation systems. 12,000 people lived there now, and more arrived every month. The fields stretched beyond the city in every direction. The crop that had started everything covered hundreds of hectares, but there were other plants now too, vegetables that grew in metallic soil, fruits that thrived in the strange light, flowers of every color, a garden on a world that had been called lifeless. Walked down the ridge, her old bones aching a little with each step. Followed beside her, still functioning after all these years. The little drone had been repaired so many times that almost none of his original parts remained. But his personality was the same, still calculating odds that no longer mattered, still complaining about inefficiency. "Your survival odds are now essentially 100%, said. "I find I have nothing useful to calculate anymore." "Then calculate how beautiful this all is," said, smiling. Was gone. He had died 3 years ago peacefully in the valley where had first seen him. Maw crawlers lived long lives, but not forever. She had sat with him at the end, her hand on his massive head, feeling his last breath leave his body. The entire settlement had mourned. They had built a monument where he fell, a simple stone with words carved into it. "He protected us. We will never forget." But children and still lived. Hundreds of maw crawlers now shared the land with the humans, patrolling the borders, warning of danger, playing with children who had grown up thinking of them as neighbors rather than monsters. Had become a matriarch, the leader of the local pack, and she still came to every morning for scratches behind her armored head. The original settlers had become the founders of a new nation, ran the science academy, teaching young people the xenobiology that the council had once called dangerous. His ideas were now the foundation of everything New Dawn did. Learn the rules, work with the planet, adapt instead of conquer. Had built the infrastructure that powered the city. Geothermal plants drew energy from the planet's volcanic heart. Water systems cleaned and distributed the enzyme rain. Communication networks connected every building and every field. She had trained hundreds of engineers, and they were now building new settlements in other parts of the planet. Was no longer a child soldier. He was the commander of the Ranger Corps, the people who explored the wilderness and made contact with new maw crawler packs. He had married a woman named, a refugee who had arrived 10 years ago, and they had 3 children. When looked at him now, she saw a man who had found peace after a lifetime of war. And who had come to the planet to die was still alive. The illness that had been killing her had slowed to almost nothing. The doctors could not explain it. Something in the planet's ecosystem, maybe the microorganisms or the strange water or something no one could identify, had given her body the strength to fight. She still worked in the greenhouse every day, her hands no longer shaking, her eyes bright with life. "It is a miracle," she said whenever anyone asked. "No," always replied. "It is just a different world, a world with different rules." The galaxy beyond the quarantine beacons was not doing well, heard reports from the refugees who arrived. The Council's colonies were failing. Planets that had been declared safe were dying from overuse. Soil was exhausted, water was poisoned, climates were collapsing. The Council's method of conquering worlds instead of joining them was destroying everything it touched. People were starting to talk about New Dawn, not just as a story anymore, but as a possibility, as proof that there was another way. Came to visit sometimes. He had retired from his job years ago, and the Council no longer cared about tracking one old communications officer. He would stay for weeks at a time, helping in the fields, playing with the children, sitting with his sister, and watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of red and gold. "You changed everything," he said to her one evening. "You know that, right? The Council will fall eventually, their system does not work, and when it falls, people will look for something better, they will look here." "I did not change anything," said. "I just paid attention, I just listened to what the planet was trying to tell me." She thought about the day she had crashed, the day she had walked out of her broken shuttle and looked at a world that everyone said would kill her. She thought about the fear she had felt, the despair, the certainty that she was going to die. And then she thought about the microorganism she had seen in the soil, the tiny creature that had survived where nothing should survive. That little organism had been her teacher. It had shown her that life finds a way always if you give it a chance. On the morning of the 20th anniversary of New Dawn, received a message. It came through official council channels, broadcast to the entire settlement for everyone to hear. "This is Ambassador of the Galactic Council. We are requesting formal negotiations with the independent world of New Dawn. We wish to discuss trade, cooperation, and the sharing of knowledge. We acknowledge that our previous approach to your world was mistaken. We are prepared to recognize New Dawn as a sovereign human territory." The settlement erupted in celebration. 20 years of struggle, 20 years of being called criminals and exiles, and now the Council was finally admitting they were wrong. But did not celebrate. She walked away from the crowds and climbed the ridge to her favorite spot. Followed her, the massive maw crawler moving as quietly as something that big could move. They sat together, looking down at the world they had helped build. The city lights were glowing in the early darkness. The fields stretched out in orderly rows. Children were running through the streets, laughing, playing games with young maw crawlers who chased them like puppies. "We will help them," said Tu, scratching the ridge above her eye. "The council, the failing colonies, everyone who is struggling, we will teach them what we learned. Not because they deserve it, but because that is what humans do. We adapt, we survive, and we help others survive too." Made a rumbling sound that meant agreement. A young woman named climbed the ridge and stood beside them. She was one of the children who had been born in New Dawn, a true child of this world. In her hands was a data tablet. "We received the council's message," said. "What should we reply?" Thought for a moment. She thought about all the people who had told her she would die. All the experts who said this planet was impossible. All the council members who had thrown her away because she tried to help people. "Send them our terraforming manual," she said. "All of it. Everything we have learned in 20 years, send it to them for free, no conditions." Look surprised. "For free, after everything they did to us." "Knowledge should not be a weapon," said. "It should be a gift. Send them the manual. Tell them we hope it helps. Tell them that New Dawn welcomes anyone who wants to learn a different way." She looked up at the sky, at the stars that were becoming visible as the sun went down. Somewhere out there, people were struggling, dying, failing. Somewhere out there, humanity needed to change or it would destroy itself. "Tell them one more thing," said. "Tell them what I learned on my first day here. This universe is not our enemy. It is not something to be conquered. It is something to be understood. And if we are willing to listen, it will teach us everything we need to know." The message went out that night, carried by radio waves across the darkness of space. Attached to it was the complete manual for surviving on worlds that everyone said could not support life. The dedication at the beginning of the manual said, "For everyone they said would not survive, plant something anyway." 20 years ago had crashed on a death world with nothing but stolen seeds and a broken drone. Now she stood on the ridge above a city of 12,000, surrounded by friends and family, human and monster alike. They had called the planet Inhospitable. She had planted crops and raised monsters as pets, and in doing so, she had shown the universe what humanity could truly be. Not conquerors, not destroyers. Just people who refused to give up, people who learned, people who adapted. People who, against all odds, found a way to bloom.